I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
The renovation crew at Ashworth Hall hadn't expected to find anything beneath the East Wing floorboards except dust and old newspaper insulation. But when contractor Liam Doyle pried up a warped panel in what used to be the private sitting room of the late Duchess of Calden, he found something else, a narrow cavity, lined in cedar, holding a single wooden box. He didn't open it. He called the estate manager, who called the family solicitor, who called Lady Eleanor Ashworth, the Duchess's sister-in-law, and the only member of the family who still visited the old house regularly. Eleanor had never been close to Margot. The two women had circled each other for 15 years of family gatherings with a kind of polite, exhausted distance. Margot too restless and outspoken for the family's taste, Eleanor too guarded to ever say so directly. When Margot died in a car accident on a rain-slicked coastal road 3 years earlier, Eleanor had grieved the way you grieve someone you never quite got to know. She drove out to Ashworth Hall alone on a gray Tuesday afternoon. The box was plainer than she expected, oak, not ornate, with a small brass clasp gone green at the edges. Inside, beneath a layer of tissue paper, sat a stack of letters tied with garden twine, a handful of photographs, and a child's drawing, faded but carefully preserved. Eleanor sat on the floor of the empty room and read. The letters weren't addressed to her. They were addressed to Margot's daughter, Iris, who'd been only 6 when her mother died and was now a teenager living abroad with her father's family, largely estranged from the Ashworths. Margot had written to her in installments, birthday letters mostly meant to be opened one a year, chronicling things she wanted Iris to know that she worried she wouldn't get the chance to say in person. How her grandmother had once run a small bakery before marrying into the family. How Margot herself had wanted to study marine biology before duty rerouted her life. How none of the family stiffness Iris might inherit was required of her. That she was allowed to be soft and loud and changeable. There was nothing scandalous in them. No conspiracy, no enemies, no hidden network of villains. Just a woman who'd known, in some quiet way, that her time might be short, trying to leave behind more of herself than portraits and place settings would ever capture. Eleanor found herself crying before she reached the 3rd letter, not out of shock, but recognition. She'd spent years assuming Margot was flighty, ungovernable, somehow lesser for not fitting the family mold. The letters revealed someone entirely different, deliberate, tender, quietly funny. Scared in the particular way of mothers who suspect they won't see their children grow up. The last item in the box was a short note, undated, tucked beneath everything else. If anyone other than Iris reads this first, know that I loved harder than I let anyone see. Tell her that. Tell her I was trying every single day to be someone she could be proud of. Eleanor didn't release the letters to the press. There was no network to expose, no villain to confront. No warning shot fired down a country lane. She did something smaller and, in its way, harder. She tracked down Iris through her father's family, flew to see her in person, and handed her the box herself. I didn't know her very well, Eleanor admitted, sitting across from a girl who had her mother's restless eyes. I think I was wrong about her for a long time. These are yours. I thought you should have them before anything else happened to this house, or to me, or to any of us. Iris read the letters alone, in her own time, over the following weeks. She didn't go on television. She didn't need to. What she got instead was the thing her mother had actually been trying to give her. Not a revelation, not a conspiracy, just proof that she'd been loved on purpose, deliberately, by someone who knew she might not get to say it in person for long. Eleanor, for her part, found that grief doesn't always need a villain to resolve. Sometimes it only needs the truth that you misjudged someone, and the chance, however late, to make that right. Princess Diana's public image was, for much of her life, shaped by tabloids more interested in her marriage and her wardrobe than her work. But by the time of her death in 1997, she had quietly become one of the most effective humanitarian advocates of her generation, and the causes she championed didn't fade with her. One of her most consequential campaigns concerned landmines. In January 1997, Diana walked through an active minefield in Wombo, Angola, wearing body armor and a visor, in a moment captured by photographers around the world. The Minds Advisory Group brought Diana to Angola in January 1997 to draw attention to the indiscriminate suffering caused by landmines. The visit was widely credited with reviving international momentum for a global ban on the weapons, which had largely stalled in diplomatic circles. Months later, the Ottawa Treaty banning anti-personnel landmines was signed by over 100 countries, and Diana's advocacy is frequently cited by historians and campaigners as a turning point in building public pressure for that outcome. She returned to landmine-affected communities again later that year, visiting Bosnia just weeks before her death, continuing to push the issue into public consciousness even as her personal life remained tabloid fodder. Her second major legacy is an HIV/AIDS advocacy, at a time when public fear and stigma around the disease were severe. In April 1987, Diana opened one of the UK's first HIV/AIDS units at London Middlesex Hospital, and in a moment that drew international attention, she shook hands with a patient without wearing gloves, a small, deliberate gesture that directly challenged the widespread and medically baseless fear that the virus could be transmitted through casual contact. The image circulated globally and is widely regarded as having helped shift public attitudes toward people living with HIV, at a moment when many patients faced isolation and discrimination even from healthcare workers. Beyond these two signature causes, Diana was patron or supporter of dozens of charities covering homelessness, leprosy, mental health, and children's welfare, often visiting hospices, shelters, and hospital wards without press notice, simply to sit with patients. After her death, her sons carried elements of her work forward in their own ways. Prince Harry founded the Centibale charity supporting children affected by HIV in southern Africa, drawing direct inspiration from his mother's work. While both princes have spoken publicly about mental health, partly in response to watching the toll that public scrutiny and personal loss took on their own family. Diana's humanitarian legacy is sometimes overshadowed in popular culture by speculation and tabloid mythology around her death. But the documented record, treaty negotiations, hospital visits, public health campaigns, shows a more durable kind of impact. Not mystery, but measurable change in how the world treated landmine survivors and people living with HIV. This is a sensitive topic touching on grief and loss. If you're processing something personal related to it, I'm glad to talk through that too. Princess Diana died in a car crash in a Paris tunnel in 1997. And within hours, the alternative explanations had already begun. Nearly 3 decades later, a steady stream of online content, videos, articles, social posts, continues to insist there's more to the story. Secret rooms, hidden letters, deathbed confessions, royal conspiracies. None of it is true. But the persistence of these stories says something interesting about how grief, fame, and distrust of institutions combine to produce modern mythology. Part of the explanation is structural. An official French investigation found that the crash was caused by the driver's loss of control of the vehicle at high speed while impaired by alcohol and prescription drugs, a conclusion reinforced by a separate years-long British inquest. But official conclusions rarely satisfy public appetite for a story that matches the emotional scale of the loss. Diana's death felt sudden and disproportionate to her cultural significance. A woman who'd spent a decade and a half as one of the most photographed people on Earth, gone in an instant in circumstances involving paparazzi pursuit, a tunnel, and a driver later found to have been drinking. The randomness of that combination is, for many people, harder to accept than a story with villains and motive. There's also a documented history of public distrust toward the royal family's handling of Diana during her life. The way the institution responded to her marriage breakdown, to her media interviews, to her popularity outpacing theirs. That distrust didn't evaporate with her death. If anything, it provided fertile ground for narratives in which the institution itself becomes the antagonist. Conspiracy theories about powerful, secretive institutions tend to flourish precisely where there's a pre-existing, legitimate history of institutional opacity, even if the specific theory built on top of that history isn't true. Diana's own contested relationship with the royal family adds another layer. She was, in her lifetime, genuinely sidelined and at times treated unfairly by both the institution and segments of the press. That part isn't conspiracy, it's documented history. Conspiracy content often works by taking something real, the family's discomfort with her, her sense of isolation in her final years, and extrapolating it into something fabricated, that family members orchestrated her death. The kernel of truth is what gives the larger fabrication its emotional traction. There's also a simpler, more mercenary explanation for why this content keeps getting made. It performs well. Videos promising secret rooms, hidden confessions, and royal cover-ups generate clicks regardless of their accuracy. And platforms' recommendation systems don't meaningfully distinguish between a well-sourced documentary and an AI-narrated fabrication with stock palace photos. The financial incentive to produce this content has, if anything, increased in the era of low-cost video generation, even as the evidentiary basis for it remains exactly as thin as it was in 1998. What's lost in the conspiracy version of Diana's story is the more interesting and better documented one. A woman who used her fame deliberately, who walked through an active minefield to draw attention to a humanitarian cause, who helped destigmatize HIV at a moment when fear of the disease was at its most irrational, who was navigating real institutional hostility without needing any of it dramatized into murder plots. The true story doesn't need embellishment to be compelling. It's the embellishment that tends to crowd it out.